my heart, my gut, my soul, after the games we saw on Thursday night in March Madness, it's all telling me to move Banchero to number 1 and Holmgren down.
What?
Yeah, what do you think about that? I'm just curious. What do you think?
I think that neither of those two guys should be number 1.
You think Jabari Smith should be number 1?
Yes.
How about Jaden Ivey? Where do you think he should be?
All right. I've been thinking about this because I was listening to your podcast with Mark Titus and Tate Frazier, which is great. It's on the Mismatch feed. It's called The Void. Go listen to it. Those are two of my favorite guys in the world. Been friends with them since their days at The Ringer. Tate was my first producer. Yep. We started together at The Ringer. I love those guys, love the success they've had, and that podcast is really good. And you guys had discussions about all these different guys. After listening to that, and I've been thinking about this a lot after watching all these guys. So I'm viewing it through the prism of if I were a decision maker in the NBA. Okay? And so let me answer it like that. I would be most scared to pass up Jabari or Ivey.
Because of the shooting ability with Smith and the downhill playmaking explosive presence of Ivey, like Morant.
Even more so than the other two.
Mm-hmm. And is that because with Chet, the lack of shot creation, and with Paolo Banchero, the uncertainty with his perimeter shooting and his defense?
I just think that I watch those two and I see scenarios where they could be absolute superstars, and it's not a big stretch for me to think that.
Is it for Banchero after a game like last night when he's playmaking at 6'10" and creating every shot on the floor and hitting threes, pull-up jumpers, spinning into the lane and making accurate kick-out passes? Because last night he looked absolutely sensational. Like the guy we saw, heard about as a hard worker, as a good two-way guy in high school. I mean, it looked like the Banchero I had hoped to see the whole year.
I thought he was outstanding. I think he is an outstanding player. With him, one of the things that concerns me just a little bit, is I don't know how impactful he is everywhere on the court. And honestly, while Banchero hit big shot, down the stretch, what I was left with was, my God, this Roach kid has the biggest balls of them all. I mean, this is 2 games in a row where he has delivered like that when it matters most. He's obviously built for it. And Mark Williams, who was kind of like, somebody you guys talked about on that pod.
Isn't he sick, dude? Isn't he so good? I thought it was very
fascinating for it to show up in the way that it did last night. Because for those of you that listened to that podcast, it was kind of a nice little preview of things to come, because one of the things that Titus said was, and I believe Tate did too, was, they might be better off playing a lot more through Mark Williams or having Mark Williams more involved. And Mark Williams made himself more involved last night, both on defense and on offense. And so he's
just such a good player. Like just a straight up good basketball player. Like he's going to be in the league 10 years.
Yeah. And I always, and I gotta be honest with you, I do kind of side with the mega athletes.
So more Jabari Smith than Paolo Banchero and
Ivey and Jabari. Like these guys are, freako. Athletes.
Yeah.
They are.
Ivey especially.
Yes.
Smith, like athleticism is verticality, but it's also like, lateral movements too. And that's where with Jabari Smith, he has it on defense, but as a shot creator, it's not there yet.
It's not, but will it be? I look at him and to me, I look at Jabari and say, he's one of those, holy mackerel. What is this guy going to look like?
Could Jabari Smith, the way I think about him is what if he's a 6'10" Ray Allen? Prime Ray Allen, people forget, not just a spot-up shooter who came off screens. He was a guy who attacked off the dribble, went to the basket, but wasn't like a primary ball handler. but he could be a one of the primary ball handlers. Is that where you see Jabari Smith as a 6'10" version of that in the modern NBA?
I don't know if he's going to be the primary ball handler, but I mean,
which is okay. It's okay if you're not the primary.
I see a lot of these guys that have been very successful in the NBA, and this year it's Mobley. I see a lot of that, and especially on the defensive end. And you guys talked about, you were bringing up Robert Williams and the idea of, and the Bucks used this very successfully with Giannis. If you've got Brook Lopez, like if you've got one of these type of guys, and we're seeing it in Memphis with Jaren Jackson Jr., where Steven Adams is there, but if they want to go small, he can move to the 5, and then you've got this guy that can fly around and just block everything, and he can play you off the pick and roll. You're never going to get targeted, with these kind of guys. And Chet falls into this class too. I mean, I think if you can get a situation where you flank these guys with someone else that's having to man up with the center, and you let them be, out of range, and let them be a rover of sorts, almost where they can play free safety, that is devastating and absolutely transformative for your defense. And I see that with Jabari. I look at him and say, boy, his defense is even going to be ahead of his offense immediately. And when he grows into all of it, this guy with, the handle's got to get a little bit tighter, but the shot looks so sweet. And he is, I don't know, man. I look at those. I'll rephrase what I said at the beginning. I'd be most scared to pass on those two, because if you told me they're going to be 10-time All-Stars and Hall of Famers, like it's not, obviously that's a massive stretch, but
you wouldn't rule it out. That's what you're saying.
I'm just saying, to me, I'd be most fearful that could happen, and that I passed on a franchise. I think those guys are more likely to be franchise altering.
But why?
How about that?
So with Banchero, last thought on him that I have, one, like right now today, Banchero can do something at a high level that Smith and Holmgren can't, and that's create shots off the dribble. Isn't that the most important, elite skill to have? And Banchero, if the ball is put in his hands all year long for Duke, if he's empowered all year long with the ball, they're winning more games than they did. That's sort of the way I feel. I mean, but like maybe he's more locked in. Like, the questions on my mind about Banchero are, out of high school, I hear about him as a hardworking player, as somebody who wants to be great. And then in college, he looks like he's totally checked out. Like, he just doesn't care. I want to understand why that is. What were the factors that went into that? Why does he suddenly play like a guy who wants to kill everybody now? Like, why is this just starting in March Madness? It's all very strange, but all I know is the guy I saw so far in all the games in the tournament, but especially in that win last night for Duke, that looked like the guy that I had hoped to see all season long with Duke, and the type of guy that I could foresee thriving in an NBA offense as one of the initiators, as the primary scorers, but also a guy who can share the ball a little bit too. My mind went straight to Oklahoma City last night. What if you plug Banchero in with Gilgeous-Alexander and Giddey? Those guys can move the ball.
You're going to act like Poku doesn't exist, Kev.
Yeah, let's talk about the two best players on the team. Not the third.
How dare you? You're just going to act like he's not there?
He can play with Banchero, but if you put Banchero, that's the thing, Chris. This year's draft class, it is so situational.
Yeah.
But depending on who gets the number one pick is going to determine who should go first. It's not just about a clear BPA. It's about the best pick. Because I don't love Banchero in Houston. I don't love him with Jalen Green. I want to see him with ball movers like Giddey and SGA, guys who can move the ball, whip it around, but also slow it down and play, isolate, post-up style. I don't know. I think Banchero on a team like that, I get really fired up about what the possibilities could be.
And I don't want this to come off like I don't like the kid or I think the kid's
you
not
do.
going to be good.
You do. You're just you're fascinated by the others. That's all.
Yes.
That's okay. I think it's that type of year. You can pick any of those three, and I'm not really all about having some big old argument. We can have those arguments when we know the draft order and where players should go. But like if you have Smith, even if you have Ivy number 1 on your board, I'm not flipping out. I'm not about to say you let's argue about this.
Well, and it's fascinating because Kev, you look at those guys, Chet's out and Banchero is still around and Jabari is out. And if we're just going by the 4 that John Hollinger was on with us, and he said he thinks that there's on the majority of boards, there's going to be a divide, that there are the 4 that are, consensus. It would take somebody breaking into those.
A Shaden Sharp, like we talked about. Kind of a random guy.
Look, even as this goes on, there is going to be the talk of you are more likely going to get immediate results from an Ivy than you are the big guys.
Banchero.
We know this.
Or Holmgren. It all depends on their role.
Or Jabari. They're not going to have the ball in their hands immediately.
Because Ivy can create. That's the thing with Banchero. He can create too.
And look up and down the NBA right now. Yes, there are a lot of good bigs, but you're going to wait a couple years. The bigs have taken, and, let's set aside Mobley, okay? Because this was a different proposition than what we've dealt with recently. It's usually a couple of years and sometimes maybe even 3 or 4 down the line before these guys become what they are going to become.
Ayton.
Yeah, and think no further than who is the best player in the league, or certainly in the argument, no matter what kind of argument you want to have, Giannis.
Yeah.
And he was more of a project, yes, but
Jokic and Embiid too, for different reasons.
But even in year 4 of Giannis, I think if I would have come on here and I would have said, this guy's going to score 50 points in an elimination game in the NBA Finals, people will be like, shut up. Like, he's good, but come on. He's not going to be like multiple MVP, like in the MVP conversation every year. Best player on a team, take them to a title, that kind of stuff. But it does take a little more time. And I think that is a little bit different than in the past. We've talked about that, where the perimeter guys have actually had an easier time coming in and having early success and being rather impactful. And that applies to Luka, that applies to Trey, that applies to Ja Morant, that applies to a lot of these different players that have come in. Whereas the bigger guys have taken a little bit longer to be super impactful. It is a guard and perimeter dominated game now.